Hello and welcome to everyone joining our conversation today about standardized testing. Our topic is on the PSAT and the up and coming digital SAT. Should you be preparing and how? My name is Donna Baines, the founder of Baines College Consulting. I have 20 years in college admissions and financial aid experience, and I use that experience to create college and career planning resources for families, school districts, and organizations. I am joined today by my friend Morris Cohen-Fars of Arbor Bridge. Morris also has over a decade of experience in academia, which has allowed him the opportunity to provide essential instruction and design curriculum for the SAT, ACT, ISEE, SSAT, and AP Sciences. Morris now uses that wide-ranging knowledge in test preparation to design customized programs to his students and families. Originally from California, Morris is a graduate of Georgetown University, where he earned his master's degree in physiology and biophysics. So I want to thank Morris for leading this conversation today. Before I turn the time over, I would like to encourage anyone watching to please feel free to add your comments or questions to the chat, and we will do our best to cover those. Thank you again, and Morris, the time is yours.
Thanks for having me, and a pleasure to meet everyone. Yeah, as Donna said, feel free to ask any questions you want throughout the entire webinar. If we see it pop up and we, Donna, you can kind of control that. If we see it pop up, we'll try to answer it as we're going. With that being said, let me pull up my slides, and we'll have a nice little discussion about the changes to the SAT, the PSAT, and whether or not you should be studying for it. And I'll give you a few tips on, if you are planning on taking the digital PSAT, how you could sort of game the system a little bit. So let's jump into it. I'll share my screen and give you all the guidance you'll ever need. So let's cover the digital SAT and PSAT. So the first question I get from families when they're first starting this journey, a lot of the time, is they'll start asking what the difference is between PSAT formats. It's a really simple question to answer, but I get it a ton. What's the difference between PSAT 8, 9, 10, 11, and MSQT, the SAT? The major difference is that as we're journeying up from PSAT 8, 9 to 10 to 11, the test does get a little bit more difficult, because those tests are designed for a different class of students. Obviously, the PSAT 8, 9 is designed for 8th and 9th graders, and the PSAT isn't going to assume that you know Algebra 2 if you're in 8th or 9th grade, so they're not going to include that. Same with PSAT 10, it's designed for 10th graders. PSAT 11 is the one that, if you're going to be studying for any of the PSATs, it'd probably be this one, because that's going to be your NMSQT year, the National Merit Scholarship Award. Now, if you score within a particular range, what that essentially means is that you can qualify for a scholarship. Now, the scholarship is going to be right around somewhere like $2,000 to $3,000. I think it was $2,500 for those that won the National Merit Scholarship. But the way it works is that when you're a National Merit Scholar, you need to score within the top 1% of other students taking the test. Now, it's going to be a little bit different, because it's not 1% of the nation, despite it being a National Merit Scholar. It's going to be 1% of your state. So if you're an 11th grader taking the PSAT, you're going to be compared to every other student in your state. And if you score within the top 1% of your state, you get that NMSQT award, and you get that $2,500 or whatever the scholarship is. Don't know the exact monetary value, but whatever that scholarship is, you'll get that as well. Now, this is where it gets tricky. So a lot of students, once again, with those 4 tests, PSAT 8 to 9, I don't frequently recommend anyone study for that. PSAT 10, same thing. What's the point of studying for that? Doesn't matter, just practice. PSAT 11, students come to me all the time asking if they should study for this test. Now, if they're scoring highly on past PSATs, that sort of pushes me towards that recommendation. Like, hey, maybe we should be studying. But I also look at the state that they're located in. And if they're in like one of these higher states, and I'll show you a map in just a second, I I tend to change up my recommendation. So this is essentially a map of the United States, and it's color coded to the NMSQT section index scores. The higher the section index, the greener it gets. The lower the section index, the redder it gets.
Hmm.
So if you're looking at this and we see a state like California, where it's 221. 221 on the PSAT equates to about like a 1510, 1520, which is a near perfect score because the PSAT is at a 1520, unlike the SAT, which is at a 1600. It's out of a little bit less. So a perfect score is what's needed in a state like California. But look at this red hotspot. That's West Virginia. West Virginia is a 207. That's about like a 1410, 1420. There's about a 100-point difference between states. So if a student comes to me and they're like, hey, I want to start studying for the PSAT, I always ask my first question is how you did on previous PSATs, how did you do on your PSAT 10, and then what state you're located in. And I throw up this map and I look and I try to see whether or not that student should devote time because I mean, students don't have a ton of time these days. And if I'm going to be making a recommendation to study for the PSAT, you better bet I'm making sure that that student has a solid chance of becoming an MSQT scholar.
So we have two questions coming in already about this topic. The first
Awesome.
the first question is, does a student have to register for the PSAT 8, 9, or 10?
No. So typically your school is going to be the one registering for the PSAT for you. So if there's a school administration, typically a lot of schools will automatically opt you in. You need to opt out. But usually it's the school, not the student, that's going to be registering the student.
And how can a parent or student get a hold of those PSAT scores?
That's going to be automatically sent to you. Weird thing this year. So the PSAT is changing. Normally, as soon as you take the PSAT, it's about a 2-month window before you get your results back. It's pretty painful. Now, because the PSAT is going digital, this is what this conversation is about, the change to the PSAT. Because the PSAT is going digital, they are saying that they're going to shorten that window of time. So you're going to be getting your PSAT scores sooner, and you should be able to log on and get those. And we don't know the exact time frame, but the College Board is saying that it's going to be a shorter window, which is a lot better than waiting 2 months. So yeah, it's a shorter window of time.
And then the final question I see here is about the scoring. When they do see their scores, they're looking at a potential score with a maximum of 225. Is that what the
So
max?
the average is 218. I think the max on the PSAT is 225. Don't quote me on that.
Is that how it looks on their score on their side?
You'll see the section index score, but a lot of students kind of ignore it.
Yeah.
What they'll see is a score that's at a 1520. So just like the SAT is at a 1600, you'll get a score at a 1600. You'll see like a 1410. The PSAT is actually going to be at a 1520 because it's a little bit of an easier test with fewer questions. They made it at 1520. I suspect that the College Board sort of did that just so there's like a difference between exams. I don't necessarily know if they really needed to do that, but yeah, it's at a 1520. 1520 is the max. That's the number that students typically focus on. A lot of them just ignore the section index score altogether. Yeah, you'll see your section index score too. It's just a different calculus where you're seeing essentially the same score.
Awesome.
Cool. Any other questions about national merit and the PSAT?
Not at this time.
Okay, cool. Well, you're about to. We'll probably get a few more questions after I dive into some of this information because now as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the PSAT is changing in October. So it's important to get comfortable with the format. The SAT is also changing. That's in March. So I want to talk about both of those changes because the changes are nearly identical. So let's jump straight into it with some guidance on test administration. So really quickly, I'm just going to dive into just some things you'll probably get accosted with come test day. So first and foremost, the test itself is no longer in test booklet format. I remember back in the day when I took a test, I get that little stack of paper. I need to get my number 2 pencil and break the seal and open the book up. You don't need to do that anymore. Now the test is going to be on your computer. So that means a couple things. First and foremost, you're going to need to have a computer that can hold a charge unplugged from the wall for a minimum of 2.5, we recommend 3 hours. So that's a really big point.
Wow.
So make sure that your computer is, first off, you can turn it on, has a stable Wi-Fi connection, and you can stay on for a period of 3 hours unplugged from the wall. Students that don't have their own laptops can request them, but you need to make this request before test day. So if you know you're going to need a laptop, make sure that you're prepared to make that request. Whether it's for the PSAT or the SAT, you can make those requests. And now because we're moving into this digital format, there's going to be a whole suite of other tools that we're going to talk about today, because I think that's the most important part. When you're talking about test format, I don't want the students I'm working with to be surprised at all. I don't want them learning, oh my God, there's a calculator here. That's a waste of time. That's anxiety provoking. You need to walk in there with some confidence, like, hey, I know what I'm about to get myself into. Because if you're just learning as you're walking into that test, you're going to be at a disadvantage, because there are going to be peers that have seen that test before that know what's coming up. So that's what I really want to talk about today. And you will be allowed scratch paper as well. So yeah, big difference is it's going to be on a computer.
So if you bring scratch paper, you can still bring a pencil.
So yeah, well, you can still bring a pencil. Still bring a pencil. I'm pretty sure scratch paper will be provided, but I would bring scratch paper just in case as well.
Right.
Okay, cool. Now this is, I don't know how many of your students are international, but this is just good news for international students. Not last year for international, but in the past, there were only 5 dates internationally, and it was such a pain for international students because they only had 5 test dates, and the 2 missing test dates were in prime testing locations. So November and June, which a lot of students take those tests. Now, internationally, you're going to have just as many tests as the SAT domestically. So I think they're sort of making it fair. But yeah, that's a big change for the digital SAT. Another question I get a lot is, okay, well, it's on the computer. Can I just take it home? No. This format is going to be the exact same in terms of you needing to go to school at 7 a.m., check in early, and then it's going to be on a laptop, but you're going to be in a proctored school or a test center. So that's not changing. So in terms of format, this is what you should expect. And then this is cool. And I'm going to talk a lot about this because, once again, this is another big thing that if students don't realize, they could, they're at a little bit of a disadvantage. And that's that there's going to be a calculator inside the testing app. And this calculator is awesome. It's Desmos. And if you're in high school right now, and you know what Desmos is. Desmos is a graphing calculator that all students, for the most part, use. I remember back when I was taking the SAT and back when I was tutoring for the SAT, we had lessons teaching students how to use their calculator. And I always hated it because I need to draw my phone. I need to take my calculator out, press function math equals why, and I had to put all of these calculations into the computer, into my calculator, and then I need to use a D-pad to trace the map, and it takes time. So a lot of the time when I was teaching graphing to students, I'd say, hey, you know what? Ignore the graphing calculator. It's going to take too long. You don't have 5 minutes to put a function in. Now, there's a graphing calculator inside the testing app, and I'll show you guys how to use this today. It's a really big change in that now you can just type it in, press enter, and then click on the button you want to use, on the point you want to see. If students don't realize the power behind Desmos, if they don't know how to use Desmos before test day, they're at a serious disadvantage. So this is one of the big changes for the digital SAT, is that there's now a calculator inside the app. Now we still recommend.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And did I see that with the digital, you can use the calculator on all math sections? Did I see that?
Yep. Yeah, so that's a big thing too. In the past, you had a no calc and a calc section. Now, get a calculator on all sections of the exam. And that calculator, we recommend students bring their own, but we also recommend students know how to use the Desmos calculator simply because of the power behind it. And we'll talk about that today. Now, another big change, now that we're on the topic of some changes, is reading comp is also changing. I in the past, I'd have a lot of students complaining about the reading comp on the SAT and now digital PSAT, on paper-based PSAT, because of the length of the passages. And some of the passages were incredibly boring. I mean, if you've sat and tried to read Frederick Douglass in under 10 minutes and try to understand what he's talking about, it is difficult and it's anxiety provoking, because that idea of the timer is always there. Like, I don't have time to understand this. Now, as students move into this digital format, what they're going to notice is that the passages are shorter. And I'll jump into this as well. You'll see that on the left, that's the paper-based SAT. I just tried to get a standard passage. This is actually not even complete. It actually went up to 100 lines. This is a pretty standard passage for the paper PSAT. Students would get this and they'd get 11 questions to answer. They need to read the passage and answer 11 questions. On the right is what the digital SAT and digital PSAT are going to look like. That's it. That's it. That's it. This is the average passage for the digital PSAT and SAT.
That's and almost the intro to the paper one.
Yeah, it is. Sure. So I do see this as a little bit of an advantage for students that, you know, have issues focusing. If when I was taking the SAT and when I was tutoring it, and I'd see that old timey passage come up, I'd hesitate for students. I'm like, hey, you need to skip this because you're gonna waste time on this, and it's not gonna be worth it. Go to another passage you're comfortable with. Now it's just easier because you have one tiny little passage. And I'll bring up an example of this as well, but same thing. You have this one little tiny passage, and I love this change. So just because we're on the topic of math changes, I want to bring up some reading changes too, so we can kind of get comfortable with it. Any questions about that?
Let me check here. There is a question about the SATs. Are all SATs the same?
Oh, that's actually a really interesting question. So one of the big changes for the SAT is that because they're going digital, they're throwing in a lot of changes to prevent cheating. So what you'll now see is that if you're in the same test center, what the College Board is saying that they're going to do is they're going to make it so that the vast majority of people in that test center have different tests. So when you're taking the test, the person next to you might be taking a completely different test with a completely different set of questions. So it's still unclear, but we are told that the test center is going to have different tests for each student in order to prevent cheating. Good question.
There's
Let's,
another
oh, sorry.
question asking how many times a student should take the SAT. So if they're a junior this year and the digital SAT is rolling out in March, should they wait till the digital SAT to test for the first time?
Man, that's a good question. Um, that's a good question. Well, I do have a slide about testing timelines that we can pop up, and I'll answer that in depth
Mhm.
because I think it's going to vary for each student. But yeah, let's save that question until we get to the testing timeline, and I promise you I'll answer it. Thanks for asking, though.
Yeah, that sounds good because a junior would be at this point taking the PSAT 11 in October.
Yep. Yep. So depending on where they are in their prep cycle, the recommendation can vary.
I understand.
We'll
Great.
get to that in a second. But let's dive back into test format. Oh, so once again, we talked about this. Um, they're talking about score delivery being a lot quicker. So with paper SAT, usually it takes about 2 weeks on average. We could take 1.5 to 3, but they're saying they're going to shorten it to 1. We've yet to see them successfully roll out 1 week all the time. Sometimes it still takes about 2 weeks for students to get their scores, but scoring is going to be quicker. That's with the SAT and PSAT as well.
Oh, that's
So yeah, let's dive into now the big changes. And this is where I want to focus the most of our time. So now you're going to be comfortable with test administration, but I want you to be comfortable, or at least I want students that are listening to this webinar to be comfortable with the changes they're going to see on test day. I want to run through the different changes and give them some tips on how they could essentially just be a little bit better than the student that's right next to them. So first off, one of the big changes that I love is that the PSAT is now shorter. It's gone from 3 hours to 2. Now, what that essentially means, and you have to look at this in the grand scheme of things, and we're going to talk about that student that asked that question about which test you should study for, using this information as well, because the average student that's studying for the SAT knows that you're going to need to take a heck of a lot of practice tests. The average student that works with Arbor Bridge takes just about 4 practice tests before they're about done with their prep and they're happy. That's the average student. Some students take more, some students take less, but 4 is about the average. So that's 12 hours of testing. But if you're taking the digital format at 2 hours a pop, that's 8. So the student immediately saves time under that same testing plan. And they could, if they wanted to, take more tests and still be within that same window of time. So the PSAT and the SAT are now shorter, and I think this is a great change. Something else that's changed is it's now 2 sections instead of 4. First, you had a reading section on the SAT, and then it went to a writing, and then math no calc, and then math calc. Painful. Now, reading and writing are condensed into one subsection, and then math is condensed into another subsection. Now, I want to dive a little bit into, and I already brought up the fact that the reading sections are shorter. I want to dive into something that's really cool, and I really want to talk to students about, and that's the cadence of questions. Now, this is a really big change that not a ton of people are talking about, and I really don't understand why it's not talked about more. Now, on the paper SAT, what you noticed is that the questions were sort of mixed. So there's a big question category on the paper SAT and PSAT called anchor and evidence. And what we as tutors at Arbor Bridge would need to do is train our students to look for that question. Because if they see that question, they now need to implement a strategy for that question subcategory. So that's that's mentally taxing. A student needs to read and memorize, like, hey, I'm looking for this question so I can implement the strategy. And they'd have to look for go through every question, and each question had a different strategy. They need to label that question. It's painful. What's this question type? Anchor and evidence. What's this question type? Inference. Labeling it like that becomes very taxing on a student. With the digital SAT, I don't know why they did this, but I love it. What they did is they grouped similar questions together. And this is a huge benefit to students that are prepping. If they know their strategy, they can now implement it because they know exactly where the questions are going to hit. So, for instance, this is the reading and writing cadence. So, what you'll see every single time is that the first 5 questions are always going to be vocab. The next 9 are always going to be reading comp. That squiggly means it's about. So it varies by a few numbers, but you know it's going to start with vocab, hit reading comp, hit grammar, hit transition rhetorical synthesis. It's going to follow this cadence precisely. What that means for students is that if you know you're not good at vocab, skip to the reading comprehension section. You know it's going to be next, and tackle it that way. Or if you have a strategy for vocab, instead of looking at 52 questions, looking for those 5 vocab questions and implementing that strategy, you can implement that strategy right away. You're like, hey, this is my strategy for vocab. When I see a vocab question, it's the first 5. This is what I need to implement. It's a huge leg up, and I think it's going to make a huge change for any student that's in a formal prep program. This is how you should be structuring your prep. If you're in a prep program and they're not doing this, they're not talking about this, I think that's a little bit of a disservice, because this is really changing the game for students. I think it makes it a little bit easier. So that's a big part of it.
So I have 2 questions coming up on this topic.
Sure.
The first is, will there still be an essay?
Oh, no. So there's no essay. The essay was actually dissolved years ago. So maybe you're thinking about the ACT. The ACT does have an essay, but it's optional, and the vast majority of students don't do it. The SAT doesn't have an essay. It hasn't had an essay for a while. So if you're thinking about the ACT, you could, and you want to do the essay for whatever reason, the ACT does have an essay. SAT does not.
I don't think many colleges are even asking or looking at that anymore anyway.
I haven't seen a student do the essay portion of the ACT in a while.
Same here. And then the other question is about the SAT prep books, whether or not their old prep books are still relevant.
Man, I don't think so. And that's the math portion of the prep books are going to be helpful because math is math, and really realistically the math section hasn't changed much. But reading comp has, grammar, the English has. So if you're using your old prep books, you might be able to use them for math, but I wouldn't use them for reading comp. I think you would need to pick up a new set.
It sounds like even Arbor Bridge has totally had to overhaul how
Yeah.
they're going to offer test prep services.
Yeah. We've massively overhauled it. We've been working with international students. Arbor Bridge has a pretty big international presence, and they rolled the SAT out digitally last March. So in order to support our students abroad, we needed to roll this out a year before our domestic counterparts who only work with US-based students. So we've been at this. We already have curriculum. The reason we know this is because we're teaching our students the cadence. Yeah, we had to massively overhaul everything.
So there are a couple of SAT test dates still happening before this conversion completely happens. So if you have those old books or those old prep programs, you can use that to prep for those dates. But once March hits, everybody's going digital.
Yep. Once March hits, it's digital and it's done. There's no going back. And if you are using old prep books, math might help. Reading and writing, that's massively overhauled. So it's not going to really. I mean, you could still use them, but like you wouldn't be as efficient. You'd be wasting a lot of time.
Sure.
All right, so now let's go to the biggest change, and this is another thing. So if you're going to take anything away from this webinar, first off, know some of the first off, know it's digital. That's the biggest part. Before I even jump into knowing that there's a calculator present, know it's digital because you need to bring your laptop in, and if you don't, disaster. So bring your laptop. And then know that you can use some of those tools inside, like the Desmos calculator. Understand the cadence of reading and writing, and try your best to practice these questions and understand that they come up in this format. But the biggest change, and the one that everyone asks me about, is the test going adaptive. What does that mean? How is that going to affect me? So first off, a non-adaptive test is just going to be a standard test that you take in class. The test is going to be the same for everyone. You're going to see a whole suite of questions and then get a grade. The way an adaptive test works is the questions tend to get a little bit more difficult as you answer more questions right, and gets easier as you answer more questions wrong. Now, the way the College Board works and the way the SAT and PSAT are going to work is that they're going to be adaptive by module. And this is one of the biggest takeaways that I want to talk about today. This is essentially the section breakdown. The way it works is you'll take the first reading and writing module. It's 27 questions, 32 minutes. After you press complete, or after the timer runs out, you jump into the next module, 27 questions, 32 minutes. Depending on how you do on that first module dictates the difficulty level of the second module. Same with math. If you do really well on math, you'll get the harder second module. If you do poorly on math, you get the easier module. And the target is right about 50%. So in our study, as we were working through College Board tests, we realized that students needed to be right about the 50% mark. So on math, you need to get more than 50%. So you need to get more than 11 questions right in order to get into the higher difficulty module. Same with reading and writing. So it's just about 50%. So the way it would essentially look is you get mixed difficulty questions first. And if you answer at least half correct, you get access to the higher difficulty module. But if you get less than half correct, you get access to the lower difficulty module. Now, a lot of students come to me and they're like, well, who cares? What if I want the lower difficulty module? Why wouldn't I want to get easier questions? And that's because of the scoring. Now, first off, before we jump into that, and I'll talk about it in a second, just know that the scoring is identical. So the scoring is still going to be out of 1,600, 800 per section. Remember, PSAT is out of 1,520, not 1,600. But SAT is out of 1,600. Now, the reason this slide is so important is because you'll get locked out of scores. So, for instance, let's say on the first module, I'm going to scroll back just a little bit. Let's say on the first module here, you answer more than 50% of the questions right. So you answer more than 50% on the reading and writing module. Well, you'll get access to the higher difficulty module. And because of that, you now get access to a higher score range. And you could get up to 800. But if we're coming back here and if you answer less than half of the questions correct, you're now locked out.
Wow.
So now the highest score you can get is a 590. The way we did this, the way we figured out the highest possible score, and this is an average, is by essentially making it so that the student answered just one question wrong on the on the first module that would have given them access to the higher. So instead of, like on math, for instance, instead of answering 11 questions right, the student answered 10. 11 questions would have gotten them into the higher module. The student answered one question less. And on the second module, we answered every single question correct. When doing that, when getting 100% on the lower difficulty second module and just 50% right on the first module, the highest the student was able to get was a 590 on reading and writing and a 550 on math.
Wow.
This is this is the important part.
Oh, that's significant.
Yeah. So this is the important part. If you're taking the PSAT or you're taking the SAT in the digital format, and obviously you're taking the digital PSAT, you have to do well on the first module. Because if you don't, you're locked out of the higher scores. It's a done deal. You can't get 800. You can't get anything higher than a 590 or 550 on these individual sections. It's something that students really need to focus on. So my tip for you, if once again, the most important thing is to focus on that first module. If you're an anxious test taker, you need to take a deep breath, calm down, take your time on that first module, because if you don't and you answer less than 50% of the questions right, you're going to be locked out of these higher scores. Does that make sense?
Incredible. Like that's strategy wise, that's really important
Yeah.
to me.
I mean, this and the cadence thing are, I think, two really big strategies that students that want to really sort of game the system and understand this test need to get their head around.
Understood.
So let's any questions about this before we move on, or any questions in the chat?
No, I don't see any.
Okay, cool. So let's dive into well, here's that slide I talked about. So to answer that question about the student being a junior, so first off, if you're a junior, that makes you the class of 2025. So junior year, you're going to be taking the digital PSAT in the fall. So in October, you're going to be taking the digital PSAT. And what this is essentially going to mean is that the PSAT is going to be in that same format that we just talked about. The cadence, the computer, the Desmos calculator, the first module being so important and adaptive, all of that you're going to experience in October. Now, when we journey into your spring, the test in March is going to be the digital format. So if you wanted to take the paper-based SAT, you still could. You could take it in October, November, and December. But after that, it's going to be digital. Whether or not to take this test is going to be a question. And what I always recommend students do is take a diagnostic and have a conversation with us. That's what we're here for. We work with a lot of the college counselors to advise students on what test is best. Because each student is different, I'll have a conversation. I'll talk to them about all three test formats: the ACT, the digital SAT, and the paper SAT. Pair them with a client services director, all still very free of charge, where they can talk about these three, take a practice test, take all three if they wanted to, and then have a more in-depth conversation about whether or not they should be taking paper digital SAT or paper ACT. Frankly, every student is different, and that's the big problem. I can't recommend digital SAT to everyone. I can't recommend paper SAT for everyone. Each student and each case is going to be different. So it really depends.
And it's just for a short window because, like we said, come March, the paper is history.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's just for juniors at this point, where this becomes so intense. For sophomores, they have the option of taking ACT and digital SAT. So that is the question. But juniors, I think the conversation probably needs to start happening now because of these changes. But either way, it's not, none of this is something that you should be afraid of. The digital SAT, if you have to take it, I mean, I've tutored this stuff for a while. I like the digital format. It's not for everyone, but I like the digital format. I like what the College Board did.
I mean, everything you're showing us so far indicates the potential to do better on a digital SAT for students.
Preliminary results from our students are pretty awesome. So once again, what we're seeing is that once the student gets the format down, once they get the strategies down, they're spending less time increasing their scores to the same point. So this is just take it with a grain of salt. We this is the first pool of students, but they tend to be spending less time, which to me sort of makes sense because the test is shorter, and prep requires you to take practice tests. So now you're taking 2-hour tests instead of 3. Your sections are shorter. So I think that plays a big role. But yeah, what we're seeing is that prep is a lot more effective. We'll see how that pans out in the next couple of years, but it's I mean, the strategies work.
And I
Surprise.
would like to remind all of our students on the call that are currently receiving services that we do partner with Arbor Bridge to offer free diagnostic testing. So we can actually facilitate setting that up for you. If that's something you're interested in, send me a message after the call today.
Yeah, that's free. And if you're working with Donna, you also get 30-minute complimentary lessons. So those demo lessons are free too. And you get a 15-minute consultation with those client services directors who can help you figure out what the heck's going on and where when you should be taking these tests.
The, re
Um,
the report alone that we get back has been really helpful for a lot of people.
yeah, I love it. It definitely has like a lot of information on it, and it's it's free. So for students that just want the test, they can take that. For students that want prep, I think we do a pretty good job. But yeah, even if they don't want prep, those diagnostics are still free through you. So let's do a quick run through on the format. I mean, when your student comes to us, they're going to be getting a dashboard. We make every one of your students a dashboard. This is what it looks like. But I want to dive into the digital SAT so we can give them an ACT, SAT, this paper. I want to dive into the digital SAT and just give you all a sense of what it looks like. So let me begin test. So this is essentially what it looks like when you begin the test. It'll take you and it'll give you the lower or higher module based on how you do. But I want to show you what each section looks like. So, I mean, this is the reading test. And look how short the passages are, just like I showed you a little bit earlier. And look at the first question. I brought up that the cadence of the questions, the first one was going to be vocab and then reading comprehension, right? Well, look at this. It's a vocab question. It was supposed to be just about 5. Vocab, 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 another vocab question. Who knew? Now we're in reading comp. So the cadence of the questions really makes it so that the student can game the system. Like, does it really matter if I'm reading this and looking for inference? No, I know it's vocab. So I need to focus on what the word melt means. I know it's vocab. I shouldn't waste time on other strategies. That makes a difference in prep, like a heck of a lot, and it saves you time. If you know what you're in for, you know what's coming, you're prepped. It really does help. So, and then reading comp comes up. And then after reading comp, you should hit grammar, which, oh, have I hit grammar? No. There you go. There you go. Grammar. So once again, after that 9 to 10 questions, you hit grammar. So it's all very formatted in this way. And if you notice it, it really does make a difference for your prep. And you can annotate, and you can take notes too. Honestly, I've talked to a lot of students about this. A lot of students don't use the annotation features, but you can do it. So, I mean, annotation played a bigger role with students when you're reading these very long passages.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. With the shorter passages, you may not need to.
And I mean, it doesn't get that much longer, right? So they're short. I mean, this is long, so they're not that crazy. And then math, I'll show you that. So once again, you get reading module 1, and then depending on how you do, if If you get 50% or more, higher module, and now higher score. If you get 50% or less by even 1 point, lower module. And the max you can get here is 550 on math, 590 average across tests on reading and writing. So with the math module, one of the big things is the Desmos calculator. So let me show you the, oh, sweet. This is like literally a perfect question for the Desmos calculator. Look, so let's say you don't know what the, Donna, do you know what the equation for a circle is?
I have no idea.
So let's pretend everyone here doesn't know what the equation of a circle is. So I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to use the graphing calculator. I'm looking for the diameter. Do you know what a diameter of a circle is?
The diameter of the circle.
You know what? Yeah, diameter is just going from one place to the next. It's from
Oh,
the
yes,
height.
I know the definition of diameter. Yes.
So that's all you need to know, right? So I want the length of the diameter of the circle. Okay, cool. I don't know. I don't know the equation, so I'm going to calculator, move it to the right so I can see the equation, and then I'm going to plug in the equation: x plus 2 squared plus y minus 1 equals 9.
You forgot your squared.
Ah, thank you. Look at that. And now I don't need to scroll back. There you go. Now it's a circle. I know it's a circle, and I look for the diameter. It's asking for the diameter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the diameter. Done.
Now you couldn't copy and paste that.
I don't know if you can copy paste. So if you can copy paste it, do it. But I'm gonna assume you can't. That's
So
something I'll ask our staff, because in the Blue Book app, when I was playing around with it, I could copy paste, but I don't know if you can copy paste on all computers. I don't know if you can copy paste when you're like locked out of your screen, because it's going to lock you out. I don't know if you can. So I'll have to ask our staff if we can, but
I think that would be important, because if we forget to add that squared function, then
that's actually true. That's actually true. So I mean, careless mistake, right? But I still fixing that careless mistake took seconds, and putting that in took seconds, instead of on math function y equals x caret 2. Oh, I forgot my parenthesis. Like, it's such a pain to use the TA86.
but you're still recommending they bring one, right?
Yeah, 100%. We recommend bringing at least a scientific calculator that can do trig functions, cosine, sine, tangent, just because, like, you can use this as a calculator, but we find that students feel a lot more comfortable. We take surveys of our students every time they take the test. And we ask them, how often do you use a Desmos calculator? How often do you use your calculator? They're still using their calculator more than the Desmos calculator.
Yeah,
So bring your
I
calculator.
think we're going to see that change in the future, though, as more students in school are using Desmos.
Maybe we have no clue, but I can tell you one thing. We right now we're seeing that students are using the calculator a lot more, and it's because there's probably going to be a lot more simple math where oh, there are going to be fill-in, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Where you just need to do, some basic stuff. Like here we go. That's basic math. So popping this into Desmos, you can, but students feel a lot more comfortable just typing it in. You have to type in the 5 for X and then multiply the entire thing by 2. So they think it's a little bit easier. But yeah, that's the bulk of it. It's not too shabby.
Love it.
In that section, and then I'll have to email ops and tell them not to grade my score, because that would be a 0. But that's it. So if you have any questions, you can email me. If you want to take a diagnostic with us, those are free, especially through Donna. Just let me know that you're coming to us through Donna, and those diagnostics are going to be free. You could take 3 different ones, and you'll get that 30-minute demo lesson. So if you are looking for prep, I know we do a good job, and I think we're one of the better ones on the market, given the fact that we have this international presence and we've been through this. We know what we're doing.
This was super enlightening and I think very helpful. I have a lot of takeaways and notes that I took even for myself about the skills that students are going to need
Yeah.
beginning next month, when even it's the digital PSAT, but between their technical skills, their strategy, understanding the cadence, I think
Mm.
being aware that the digital test is now going to be adaptive and reminding students that focusing on that first module and the importance of that first module is huge. But I'm really looking forward to this change. I know a lot of people are scared of change, don't like change, but everything I'm seeing is indicating that for students that are high anxiety or have a hard time with that mental stamina, we're going from 3 hours now to 2 hours. I'm actually thrilled that this is the direction that the SAT is going. I don't know how you feel or how others feel, but I am positive. I have a good outlook.
I feel the same. I have a bias. I have
Yeah.
a bias towards the digital format because I mean, I don't like students prepping all their entire life away. Like that's not how our bridge works. We focus on efficiency. And if a student's prepping for the paper-based SAT, I know the amount of work it takes to prep for the paper-based SAT, prepping for all those reading comp sections, taking all those practice tests. It's just it's burdensome, and I feel like the new format it's a little less burdensome, if I'm being honest.
But
So
I'm gonna have a hard time throwing away my big old books. I don't know.
the big blue books,
Now I have one. Where is it? It's
you
around
need to
so
another
much.
set of big books now.
Well, thank you so much for this awesome lesson. I think that there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom that students will be able to draw from this. And there's your contact information. I don't see any more questions in the chat at this time. But if you are interested in reaching out, there's Morris's email. You can also find me at collegehelp.me online, book a free Zoom session, and get more information on how to get ready for the test, how to get ready for college or career. So thank you again, and this has been absolutely awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.